This is the Public Eye Podcast, uncovering and celebrating excellence at all levels of public sector HR, produced by the Public Sector HR Association. Nikita Bullock is a public sector principal and global DEI and B ambassador with UKG. She primarily focuses on working with agencies in state, local governments, and special districts to help them become employers of choice by rethinking their current human capital management practices and work-life strategies. Bob Lavinia is a senior fellow, public sector, also with UKG. Bob advocates for, promotes, and advises on effective practices that enable government to attract, develop, engage, and retain talent. Our conversation today will largely focus on the importance of building a robust workplace culture of belonging. Nikita speaks to us from South Florida, and Bob is in Madison, Wisconsin. Welcome to both of you. Hello.
Hello, and thank you. Excited to be here.
It is great to have you both, and please say hello to my podcast partner, Charles Epstein.
Great to be with you.
Yes, same. Thanks so much for taking the time. Bob, last time I was in Madison, I was visiting a friend of mine who had just graduated law school, went to the campus there, and they were playing up against a large wall, the classic movie Freaks, an indelible experience.
Well, that's probably pretty relevant to the culture here in Madison, Wisconsin.
No comment. You said it, Bob. No. Anyway, again, thanks so much, guys, for taking the time. You know, the both of you have committed the majority of your careers to the public sector. Nikita, you started your career as a financial services rep at MetLife. What drew you, Nikita, to the public sector? How was it making that transition?
So, you know, I wish I could say that it was like some big sparking moment of genius or something, you know, phenomenal that happened. But I remember having a couple of interviews, one with Merrill Lynch and another with the International City Managers Association Retirement Court. And I did a pros and cons sheet. And Merrill was more attractive initially. I was, you know, in my early 20s. And I thought, you know, Merrill is the place. It's glamorous. It's wonderful. But then I also thought about the fact that I had just had a child who was at that point about 3 weeks old. And I wondered what my life would look like without any work-life balance, with, you know, being a bulldog, because I definitely had the propensity to be that person if I needed to as well, right? That cutthroat person. Or if I wanted to be in a space where I knew that, you know, I was going to make a difference, right? So it was going to be more meaningful work. I was going to be able to help to shape the lives and to build retirement security for individuals who serve every day. And so I decided, I remember, you know, actually coming across my pros, I made a pros and cons sheet. And, you know, one of them was, you know, work-life balance or more money and more glamour, because I also, you know, was definitely a fan of the glamour as well. But then it came down to just, you know, being true to myself and recognizing that, you know, the person I wanted to be was someone who would impact others in a more meaningful and beneficial way. And so the public sector created that opportunity for me to serve and to really, you know, fulfill my life's purpose, if you would.
And has it?
It has, for sure. It still does.
Excellent. Excellent. You know, Bob, you served in various capacities in the public sector, with much of your recent work centered on employee engagement. In fact, you wrote the book, literally the book, on public sector employee engagement. What initially drew you to public sector work? I know you majored in public policy and went to get an MA, I believe, at Cornell in HR administration, and your first gig was in the public sector. So I'm curious, what drew you to that work?
Well, you know, like Nikita, it's really been about purpose for me, Charles. I believe in government and really the ability of government to help people improve their lives. And my introduction to government goes back a long way to literally when I was 8 years old. The 1960 presidential election between John F. Kennedy and Richard M. Nixon. I can remember watching the first ever televised debate on our 14-inch black and white TV. I was probably the only 8-year-old in the country who was watching the debate. And I was fascinated. And then the next election night came along, watched the returns, but I went to bed not knowing who would win the election. We were waiting for the Alaska and Hawaii returns. Those were the days when you actually had to count the votes before you knew who won the election. There were no projections by the networks when the polls were closed. So I woke up the next morning and learned that Kennedy had won the election by a razor thin margin. But I was really hooked on government then. Mm-hmm. Then more personally, a few years later, we moved into public housing, and I saw and experienced firsthand how government can enable and really empower people who need help to improve their lives. And then, as you mentioned, I went to George Washington University in Washington, D.C., studied government, got my first job in the federal government, the Government Accountability Office, then went on to work for state government here in Wisconsin. I worked with hundreds of local governments, worked for a nonprofit that served government agencies, worked here at the University of Wisconsin in public higher ed. So I really had the full range of experience in the public sector. And I have to say, after being in the world of work for almost 50 years, I still, even more than ever, believe in government and the ability of government to help people improve their lives. But in order for government to do that, it has to operate efficiently and effectively. And that's why I wrote the book about employee engagement as the key to organizational performance, including in government. And really, that's what UKG is about, giving the public sector folks the tools to deliver for the people that govern us.
Interesting. So to some extent, we have Cook County to thank for your lengthy and productive career in the public sector. So shout out to Cook County. And I'll tell you what.
All the dead people who voted in Cook County.
Indeed. And I'll tell you, at 8, I was watching the Mets lose to the Phillies and dreaming about being a shortstop. So, that's pretty impressive at the age of 8 to have been trajectory.
Well, Charles, I root for the Yankees and whoever's playing the Mets.
Same as Tom, though. He's a Phillies fan, being a Phillies guy, but I don't want to step on his lines.
Well, as we're recording this, the Mets just swept the Phillies in New York, so no comment. We're going to continue here. Leave sports and back to the business at hand. Hey, Nikita, tell us a little bit about your work as a public sector DEIB ambassador and what your work entails.
So my work is, I'm going to say, first of all, is fun, right? Yeah. It involves or entails me connecting with a lot of public sector leaders. I have the privilege of traveling the country and partnering with different members of associations and public officials, and having an opportunity to really learn a lot from them and what they're dealing with so that I could take it back to UKG and help us then to create the solutions that are going to be beneficial for their people. So a lot of my work is really just, being in touch with the public sector and learning from them and then using that to better serve them and people in general.
And Bob, if you would, tell us about your role as Senior Fellow Public Sector with UKG.
Well, like Nikita just said, it's really about me being in touch with the public sector and learning. And as you mentioned in the intro, my job is to advocate for, promote, and advise on effective practices that enable government to attract, develop, engage, and retain talent, which I think is the biggest challenge facing the public sector. And like Nikita, I have a great job that allows me to apply what I learned during my career as an HR practitioner. So I speak and write a lot about the challenges facing government in attracting, retaining talent, but also the solutions based on research and what we see as we work with public sector organizations across the country on the front lines as government agencies adapt to the new world of work. And I'm honored to speak to public servants around the country. And I also get to share what UKG is doing in human capital management in terms of solutions and tools, and really the great research that's being done by our Great Place to Work Institute and our Workforce Institute, our sort of think tanks at UKG.
Yeah, you mentioned the new world at work. As we continue to emerge from the pandemic, how has the world of work changed, especially in the public sector?
So the world of work has changed quite a bit, I'll say. I think the pandemic kind of forced us to rethink what was important, right? I feel like people enter the public sector, especially because they knew that one, they would have that sense of work-life balance that I, mentioned earlier. But also they entered for benefits, right? So they wanted to have this great stability, to have this, pension plan, to have, perhaps not a great paycheck, but to have a reliable one, right? That they knew they could count on. So those things were important coming into the pandemic. However, the pandemic created, I'm going to say, a new urgency and also new awareness that life is more than money and benefits. It's also about balance. It's also about, actually just being able to live your life, right? So if you don't have that balance, you can't live your life, number one. And then a lot of people, especially in the public sector, they realized that they were risking their lives. So while much of the private sector got a chance to go home, work remotely, many public sector employees did not have that luxury. When we think especially about first responders who had to be there, risking their lives, being in contact with people, or we think about the utilities people who still had to make sure that we had, water and electricity, right? So, the public sector the pandemic rather, forced everyone to re-examine the meaning of work and whether or not it was that they should even work. So what I saw personally was a lot of people who decided that, hey, instead of working for the next 10 years to maximize my multiplier to get the most out of my pension, I'm going to retire right now. So, we saw increased vacancies in the public sector. Additionally, we saw people who previously would just, work and, hold their head down and be okay with coming in and accepting maybe, not the best compensation, say, for me to give up my life potentially, to give up because, a lot of people are risking their lives, right? I need to go ahead and make sure that I'm getting paid in a way that's going to be competitive. So we're having now employees say, I need more pay. I need more time, but I also need to know that I'm valued for my service, right? That I belong in this organization. And so I think the pandemic forced us all to really take a look at what's important, and DEI and B, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, came to the forefront. We also had the summer of racial reckoning, if you would, right, with the murder of George Floyd. And again, that said, is this the type of should I be working in a space where people are not even appreciating human life? And is my life even valued? Am I valuable? Am I important? Do I belong? And so now the current climate says, if I'm not getting these things, then I'm not going to work for you, right? And I think the number of vacancies that you're seeing in the public sector reflect that, perhaps people are not feeling like they're getting that.
Yeah. We're definitely going to move into some of those issues.
I want to amplify
sure.
Nikita's comments, especially around data. And, what we're seeing is that this workforce crisis is especially affecting state and local government. And data just came out today from Bureau of Labor Statistics showing that in March, the most recent month for which data are available, there were 833,000 vacancies in state and local government, but only 333,000 hires. So while the private sector has recovered the jobs that it lost during the pandemic, the public sector continues to fall behind. There was a survey done several months ago, national survey of state and local government employees showing that 59% of them are thinking about changing jobs. Think about that. 6 out of 10 public sector employees, state and local government, and there are about 11 million of them, are thinking about changing jobs. The Washington Post described what's going on in state and local government as a workforce crisis that is paralyzing state and local government across the board, organizations, occupations, and frighteningly, it is interfering with government's ability to respond to crises,
Yes.
emergencies, and disasters. So, I mean, this is not a theoretical thing. This workforce shortage, this crisis, particularly in state and local government, affects people literally where they live. And as Nikita points out, you know, some of it has to do with pay, but I think organizations are dealing with that. But the bigger questions are about culture and purpose and finding an opportunity to work in an organization where you feel like you belong, you feel like you're making a difference, and you can find purpose. And I think the good news in the public sector is there ought to be branding and marketing around purpose and belonging, because I can't think of any sector where mission and purpose are more important than in the public sector.
You know, by the way, not to make an advertisement for Posh or this particular podcast, which is say I'm going to do exactly that. But the impetus for this podcast is really to shine a light on all of the innovation, all the great work that's being done in the public sector. And it really sort of goes to what you're talking about, Bob, is that we need to get out there and let people know what this work is all about. Yes. And the breadth and the talents of the people who are drawn toward it. Because let's face it, over the last handful of years, many years, in fact, this kind of work has been marginalized, stereotyped, and made to look not as attractive as it could be.
That's right. And branding and marketing, public sector opportunities, which used to be words that we never heard in government. We need to be I always like to say we, even though I work in the private sector now, need to be more aggressive in communicating the many, many ways that public sector jobs can be meaningful, purposeful, and really affect in positive ways the people that government serves. You know, it's not just a bureaucratic, sit in your office. People are on the front lines, as Nikita said. People risk their lives and their health and the health of their families to continue to deliver services to people in their states and communities, despite the pandemic. We owe those people a great debt of gratitude.
Yeah. By the way, you two guys are the perfect people to speak to this broad range of issues, mainly because you both have simultaneously feet in the private and public sector. As we speak, you're working for UKG, but obviously serving and focusing on the public sector. So you guys bring a really interesting, balanced perspective to this.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, no question about that. And, for years we've talked about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's only fairly recently that we've added the B for belonging to it. First, how do you define belonging, and how do you delineate between inclusion and belonging? Nikita, you want to take that first?
Sure. So I'm going to let someone far wiser than myself define it, and that was Verna Myers, who talked about diversity as being invited to a party, inclusion as being asked to dance, and then I'm going to now move to our Chief Belonging Officer, Ryan Reeves, who says belonging is being asked then to host the next party, right? So someone who is diverse, I like to tell people I am diverse by design, right? My background makes me a person who is diverse. And so UKG and other organizations, and I'm going to focus, let's say, on the public sector specifically. The public sector has been able to meet diversity numbers, right? Because diversity looks at representation within an organization. So it's potentially a checkbox initiative. Inclusion is feeling like, okay, well, I have a seat at the table. And so now I'm able then to speak potentially as well, maybe not with, my full voice, but I'm able to speak if I need to. Belonging takes it to a whole new level. Belonging in the workplace gives an employee a sense that, that they're uniquely valued for being themselves. So for being their authentic self. At UKG, we say uniquely you, uniquely valued, and they're cherished for this. They're not a fit. When I look at the workplace, they're an ad. So when you belong to an organization, you're definitely an insider, right? You are not just just a checkbox. You're not just another number, but you are someone there who knows then that you should speak up because you are respected, you're valued, and you're empowered. And I think more so than anything else, it's the empowerment that comes from belonging that is going to be the most impactful when it comes to what happens in the public sector.
Yeah, I used to have a colleague at the university who said that we don't want our employees to have to check their personalities at the door when they come to work, as long as their personalities are workplace appropriate. But yes. I always think of that quote when we talk about these issues. And I want to bring up another point, and this was emphasized by the Surgeon General, and it's about loneliness. U.S. is facing, according to him, an epidemic of loneliness and isolation. About 1 in 2 adults in the U.S. experiences loneliness, and there's a mortality impact of being socially disconnected. And he says it's similar to that if someone smoked 15 cigarettes a day. And it's exacerbated by remote work. And this is an issue that organizations are beginning to come to grips with. And I think belonging is certainly an aspect of that. Gallup, when it does its engagement survey, finds that the question, I have a best friend at work, is a key driver of employee engagement. And that's another way to describe belonging. So organizations are beginning to realize that this is an important issue, this loneliness, and it's a cousin to the belonging question. So organizations are responding in several ways, creating employee resource groups to help employees connect with each other and really feel that sense of belonging, as Nikita described it, and also asking their employees through surveys, tell us how you feel about working here so we can take action to improve the culture and the environment.
Bob, you previously pointed to the importance of marketing and PR, particularly vis-a-vis bringing people in. Belonging could very well be one of those elements that makes a particular agency organization an employer of choice. No?
Yes, that's right. And a point that I like to make, we often talk about these cultural aspects with regard to retention. But, what happens internally in an organization affects how people view it externally. So if you have a strong culture of belonging, if you have a strong culture of inclusivity, that's not only going to contribute to retention. People are going to feel good about working there and want to stay, but it's also going to attract people from the outside. And we hear a lot about recruiting problems in the public sector. I quoted you some statistics from BLS earlier that show that we're not hiring as many people as vacancies. But if you don't think that what happens internally affects how people view the organization externally, just go to Glassdoor, Indeed, and look at the employee reviews, which are right next to the vacancy announcements.
Right.
And you better believe people are reading those employee reviews before they're deciding whether or not to apply to an organization. And a lot of those reviews address things like diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging.
Our guests today are Nikita Bullock and Bob Lavinia from UKG. Nikita, what role does data and technology have in creating a culture of belonging?
I'm going to say actually quite a bit, right? So a huge role. There's a saying that what gets measured gets done. And so if belonging is, or even DEI and B altogether, if this is just viewed as a nice to have, a feel good factor, then nothing gets done. But once it's measured, we know it's going to get done because it is a business imperative. And so technology helps to ensure accountability. And so things like, or tools like employee feedback platforms and collaboration tools really help to facilitate open communication and provide a safe space for employees to share their experiences and ideas. These platforms enable organizations to collect real-time feedback, address concerns that are existent, and implement targeted interventions to foster a sense of belonging. Also, data and technology enables organizations to track their progress towards the work that they're doing. So they also get to measure the impact of any initiatives that they put in place, and then they can make data-driven decisions to continually improve the workplace. UKG is actually involved in building a belonging hub with the Great Place to Work organization. And so Great Place to Work is going to be able to deliver this platform to employers, hopefully by the end of this year, where they will have real-time data. They'll have a hub to tell them, hey, this division is deficient or this one's doing well, and then also provide actionable insights to tell them that, hey, these are the next steps that you should take to help your employees who are impacted and to help them to be a great place to work. So love that question. Thank you.
Yeah. And Bob, can you add anything to that?
I love Nikita's quote. I have a little different one, which is, if it's not measured, it doesn't matter.
True.
So as Nikita suggests, we can't guess about what is important to our employees and what keeps them in the organization and what might attract others to the organization. Someone also said that, culture is not what leadership says in meetings. It's what the employees say in the parking lot. Right. So, we need to understand, and surveys are the most valid and comprehensive way to understand how our employees feel about the entire employee experience. And Great Place to Work, which Nikita mentioned, is really the global leader in employee culture and certifies organizations as great places to work based on the employee survey. So these tools to allow people to be heard and tell the organization what I feel good about here in terms of the culture, in terms of things like belonging, and what I think the organization needs to do to improve. We need to reach out to employees and understand how they feel. We can't guess about this stuff. We have to base our decisions on data.
Bob, you mentioned that culture is not what leadership says it is, but what gets discussed in the parking lot. So to put it in Office-ese, the show Office, it's not what unfolds in the office. It's the asides and comments you make to the candid camera. And what people are not seeing because they're only getting the audio portion. I guess, Bob, you're making sort of an implicit homage to one of the Office characters. You are wearing your red Cornell T-shirt.
Yes, I am.
So you obviously anticipated the tenor of this conversation. That's incredibly remarkable.
Yeah.
You're giving me a little too much credit, Charles.
Maybe.
Anyway, and Bob, I should mention that Charles and I are just sons of Ivy. His dad went to Columbia, my dad went to Penn.
Right.
So we're one step removed, but you're the real deal.
There you go. We're
We all have Harvard, Princeton, Yale envy.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. But
and
there are some who consider only Yale, Harvard, and Princeton to be the real Ivies. The others are the secondaries.
Even in the Ivy League, there's hierarchy.
Tell us about specific belonging initiatives that you've been involved with vis-a-vis public sector agencies. Nikita?
So I get to participate in employee resource groups. And actually, let's go back a bit. So even before ERGs, being a part of the public sector and working, just so closely with that field for the past 20 plus years, I've been able to really influence and impact positive change at all levels of the organization. I've had individual meetings, one-on-ones with perhaps about 20,000 individuals, right, in the public sector. So ranging from the janitor to the city manager to the mayor, or, so pick a person, right? When it comes to state and local government, especially. And so I've been able to, through that work, so through my work with the ICMARC, but also through my work with the National Forum for Black Public Administrators, I've been able to directly impact what happens in the culture of the public sector, working with or supporting employee resource groups. Also, as a speaker, I've been able to speak to matters that are relevant to belonging, diversity, equity, inclusion And even if we did not have those words for it, because I feel that we've been able to gain the language that we need to be able to call these things out. We didn't always have the language. We just knew that, something had to be done. We're just doing the work that was necessary. So my work with the NFBPA especially has been crucial in helping to really positively impact the public sector's belonging and culture.
Yeah, just a quick comment before Bob, you weigh in to bring it back to 1960 and to your original comment about your formative experience. Nikita mentions her experience, a broad experience from the janitor on up through the organization. We actually had somebody on one of our other podcasts who related this great anecdote where JFK was visiting, it must have been 62 or thereabouts, visiting NASA. You're shaking your head. I think you know the anecdote.
Yeah.
And he's working with his retinue, and he stops. He sees this janitor. Sir, what do you do here? He goes, well, I'm helping put a man on the moon.
Yes.
Right?
Very familiar with that. Yes.
Right. So it's a great I know you're both shaking your head, so you knew where that was coming, but where that was going. But I always love that.
And what I like to say as follow-up is, wouldn't it be great if everyone in our organizations had that kind of connection between the work they do and the mission of the organization, regardless of what they do or where they do it. And I have an anecdote about Nikita. I was at an event which Nikita did not attend, and one of my colleagues, UKG colleagues, turned to me and he said, if Nikita were here, she would have already made friends with everyone in this room. The kind of person she is. So we decided from now on, wherever and whenever we go somewhere, Nikita's coming with us.
What I can say, though, as well, is that, at UKG, our purpose is people. And that is absolutely my purpose as well. And it aligns so perfectly well because that is the purpose of the public sector, right? They're there for the people, by the people. It's all about the people. And so, Bob, I appreciate that great compliment because I am definitely a people-centric person. I love all people. And so that shows in the work that I get to do, and it fulfills my purpose as well.
And I've seen you in action. Can I just make a comment about initiatives with public sector agencies? My work has been around employee engagement, as you mentioned. I wrote the book. And the reason I wrote the book is because I wanted to describe the implications of the differences between the public and private sectors in measuring and improving engagement. I think there are significant differences, but there really isn't a one-size-fits-all solution to attracting and retaining talent, to belonging. You have to understand what's going on in your workforce before you can take action. As I mentioned earlier, you can't guess about these stuff. You need data. And a lot of my career, at least recently, the last 15 years, has been working with organizations to reach out to their employees, to collect empirical data, to understand what employees feel good about and what they don't feel good about, and then taking action to improve the culture and the working environment. And that's a lot of what we do at UKG as well. So thanks for letting me put a footnote on that.
Excellent. Thank
you. Bob, I'm not going to add on too much, but, just say that, since Bob joined UKG, we can actually see the difference in how we approach work as well with the public sector, right? So we have an expansive team that's dedicated to the public sector. And I think we have over 100 years of combined experience, right? If you look at our public sector team. But what Bob's real strength is, and I know he's perhaps too modest to say this, Bob is a connector as well. And, he's just he has a great humble spirit. And so I remember before Bob even joined our organization, he was telling me how much he wanted to learn from me. And there I was thinking, oh my gosh, I want to learn from this guy, right? Like who's literally written the book on employee engagement. So really cool people.
Wonderful. That's just terrific. Nikita, I saw on your LinkedIn page a post about the Handy Scholars Awards, which leads me to ask, what can be done? What are you doing in your respective roles with UKG to make the public sector an attractive career choice for young people in high school or college who are unsure of the path they'd like to take?
So I think the public sector has been very generous. And, one of the things that I believe Bob actually talked about this 2 weeks ago, or was it last week at GFOA in Portland, Oregon? And that's about the fact that the public sector actually has some of the highest start in compensation. So for people who are, frontline workers and people who are perhaps at the start of their careers, the public sector outpays the private sector, right? So if you're looking just from a compensation perspective, if you're just starting a career, the public sector is a great place to go, right? So why not come to this amazing area and then find yourself a career here where then that you're going to be able to make a difference, to impact positive change, and to really fulfill a great purpose, which again comes back to serving people.
Nikita, Bob, thanks so much. I think we covered quite a lot of ground here today. Anything else you'd like to add?
I'm just going to say that, first of all, thank you all for inviting us. And I'm excited about the work that Poshra is doing to, again, impact positive change, to really change with the times as well, right? We know that the world of work has forever evolved. And so if we don't evolve with this new world of work, then we will get left behind. So I'm glad to see that this organization has really dedicated itself to making sure that, number one, it's leading the way when it comes to the new world of work. So that's it. Thank you. And thanks for having us.
Yeah, this has been great. And, I'm a past president of the organization, so it's particularly meaningful to me to be involved in conversations like this. And I also strongly believe in the mission of the organization and the resources that it provides to public sector HR professionals across the country, because attracting, developing, engaging talent, retaining talent is the biggest challenge facing public sector organizations. So to create an environment where employees feel good about what they're doing, where we can attract talented people, where employees feel like they belong. And as I mentioned, there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. We really need to reach out to our workforce and understand how they feel. When I was a consultant, the mantra was, when we go into an organization, whatever the question is, the employees always have the answer. We just have to talk to our employees, reach out to them, and understand. I think that applies to the workforce challenges in the public sector as well. So, again, thank you very much for allowing us to have this conversation.
Right. Sort of like taking that chisel to a big piece of rock and saying, I know there's a statue in there somewhere.
That's what Michelangelo said, right?
Exactly.
I'm just
just liberating the statue from this block of marble.
Well, we thank both of you so much for joining us. Nikita, Bob, thank you. And we look forward to speaking with you again in the future. Nikita Bullock is a public sector principal and global DEI and B ambassador with UKG. Bob Lavinia, a senior fellow, public sector, also with UKG. Nikita spoke to us from South Florida. Bob from Madison, Wisconsin. The Public Eye Podcast, uncovering and celebrating excellence at all levels of public sector HR, produced by the Public Sector HR Association, providing human resource leadership, advocacy, professional development, and community for HR professionals in the public sector. Thanks for listening.